It hadn't rained in months, and when the sky finally opened, the town seemed to hold its breath. Each drop splashed against the cracked pavement like a question no one was ready to answer. Amara stood on her doorstep wearing a thin jacket, feeling the cold water seep through the fabric and into her bones. Her world had become a slow, repetitive loop of sweeping floors, selling handmade bracelets by the roadside and going home to an empty room. She had grown invisible in the city. No one noticed her empty pockets, her worn shoes, or the quiet pride she carried in her back. The thunder rumbled overhead, but to her ears it sounded like an old friend returning, reminding her that even the sky needed to cry sometimes. She watched neighbors struggle with flimsy umbrellas that flipped inside out, their curses swallowed by the deep, wet air. It felt fitting that she, too, would be drenched and exposed tonight, but she welcomed the cleansing. The rain blurred the neon signs into soft halos, washing away the dust of too many worn-out days. For a moment, Amara felt the weight inside her chest loosen, as though the sky's tears were apologizing for months of silence. She inhaled the metallic tang of fresh rain and felt something stir, a silent promise that life could begin again in the wet and wild. Little did she know that under that same gray sky, someone else was searching for his own moment of freedom, and that search would change them both forever. As she shuffled down the empty street toward her shack, Amara's boots slapped against the wet asphalt in soft staccato. She tugged her hood low, trying to shield her face from the sharp sting of each raindrop. Up ahead, beneath the sickly glow of a flickering street lamp, she saw a man hunched at a bus stop, soaked and silent as a mannequin left out in the storm. His coat clung to his shoulders like wet canvas, and his shoulders slumped as if the world had taught him to carry every burden alone. He didn't look up when she approached, but his stillness tugged at her heart. Something about him, maybe the way he folded his hands over his knees, or the haunted slump of his spine, spoke to her. She couldn't walk past him, not in that flood of hurt and rain. Without fully knowing why, she called out, "Hey, do you need somewhere dry?" Her own voice sounded small against the roar of the storm, but it cut through the night. He finally turned his head, revealing eyes dark and distant, like embers that had forgotten how to burn. He didn't answer. He only nodded once, slowly, as if permission had been granted by the rain itself. Amara led him through the puddles, splashing occasionally when her boots struck a hidden pothole. At her door, she fumbled with the rusty lock and slipped inside, flipping the old switch that hung precariously by one wire. A single bulb flickered to life, revealing cramped walls lined with peeling paint and a battered couch that looked as tired as she felt. "Make yourself at home," she said, shrugging off her jacket and draping it over a backless chair. He took a seat on the couch's edge, eyes locked on the single window where rain trailed down like spilled tears. Silence stretched between them, thick as the humid air. Amara filled a chipped bowl with warm water and placed it on the low coffee table. She handed him a spoon, then stirred in a handful of noodles from a tattered package she always kept for nights like this. "I'm Amara," she offered softly. He met her gaze for a moment, lifting the spoon to his lips without saying a word. She watched as he tasted the broth, then closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, as though the warmth inside the bowl thawed something frozen in his chest. And in that quiet exchange, a fragile bond was formed, one of necessity, one of mercy, one that neither could yet name. The meal passed in silence, interrupted only by the clink of metal against ceramic and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Amara cleaned up the dishes, her mind racing with questions she dared not voice. Who was this man who wouldn't speak? Why had he not asked for help and yet accepted it so readily? She felt oddly vulnerable in his silent presence, as if her every move was being judged by unseen standards. She slumped onto the edge of the couch across from him and finally asked, "Where did you come from?" He set the empty bowl aside and rubbed the back of his neck, still saying nothing. The room felt smaller, the storm louder, and Amara realized she'd expected answers that might never come. Instead, she let the silence stretch, sending kindness into the space between them like a whispered prayer. And when at last he looked at her again, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time, relief. Morning light filtered through the cracked window as Amara stirred awake, the storm reduced to a soft drizzle. She rubbed sleep from her eyes and glanced around, expecting the couch to be empty. Instead, the man was gone. Her heart thumped with a sudden panic. Had she done something wrong? Had she offended him with her pity? She grabbed her coat and flung the door open, calling his name into the corridor. No answer. Just the slow drip of rain from the eaves. Amara's chest tightened. She had already grown used to the quiet company of the stranger she barely knew. She stepped onto the street, scanning for any sign of him, but the bus stop was empty. Just wet asphalt and the faint echo of tires on slick roads. She wanted to be angry at his silence, to scold him for leaving without a word, but the hope she'd felt drowned in relief that he had even wanted her help in the first place. She walked back home, shoulders hunched against the rain, wondering if she'd imagined his presence. Or if he would return at all. Late that afternoon, just as Amara was about to set up her bracelet stand by the market stalls, she saw him approaching across the muddy square. He carried 2 heavy plastic bags, one filled with groceries, and the other holding a small generator wrapped in an oilcloth. Her breath caught in her throat. He walked up without a word, set the bags at her feet, and nodded toward the generator as if it spoke on his behalf. "I thought you," she began, but he held up a hand, his eyes calm and apologetic. She swallowed and forced a shaky laugh. "I thought you hated my cooking." He didn't smile, but his gaze softened. She reached out and unwrapped the generator, amazed by his thoughtfulness. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "You did," he said quietly, and for the first time, there was a hint of his voice. There was something unspoken in his words, a confession that he feared being left again. And although she wanted to be angry at his disappearance, she was too relieved to harbor any resentment. Over the next few days, Jay, though still unspoken, fell into a quiet routine in Amara's world. He helped her carry water jugs from a distant tap, held the generator steady as she plugged in a single lamp, and learned to weave bracelets under her patient guidance. He moved with a grace that didn't belong in these dusty streets, the straight posture, the clean-cut nails, the faint shimmer of a watch hidden beneath his sleeve. Amara noticed everything in him, even as he remained guarded and silent. She laughed when he fumbled her bracelet-making tool, and he smiled back with a vulnerability she had never earned before. In return, his hands guided hers when a knot refused to loosen, his fingers brushing hers like a confession. Their unspoken partnership felt charged with electricity, more potent than any machine he could have brought. And though they barely spoke, she understood in his every gesture that he was searching for something she had unknowingly given, belonging. One morning at the bustling market, Amara stood behind her makeshift stall arranging bracelets on a scrap of cloth. Jay hovered nearby, watching customers haggle over handmade trinkets while she patiently explained the meaning behind each bead. A young girl asked about a bracelet strung with green stones, and Amara launched into a story about hope and renewal. Jay's eyes softened, and he reached into his pocket to offer exact change before she could haggle. She noticed then that his hands were too clean for a man who'd spent nights sleeping on sidewalks. Suspicion flickered in her chest like a fault line. When she looked back up, she saw him exchange a brief nod with a stranger hovering at the edge of the stall, phone raised as if recording. Amara's heart pounded. Had someone been watching them all along? She grabbed Jay's arm, whispering, "Who is he?" Jay's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He gently shook off her hand and turned away, blending into the crowd as if he belonged to two worlds at once. The chill of doubt sank into Amara's bones. She realized then that their fragile sanctuary might be more dangerous than the storm outside. That night, the generator hummed under the low, flickering light of the single bulb as Jay packed his soggy coat and crammed a few belongings into a battered duffel. Amara found him by the doorway, hands trembling around the zipper. "You can't leave again," she whispered, voice thick with hurt and fear. Jay met her gaze, his eyes glinting in the yellow glow. He opened his mouth, then closed it as if wrestling with two halves of himself. The silence that followed roared louder than the rainstorm ever could. Finally, he lifted his head and offered a sad nod, stepping past her into the chill night. Amara reached out, but her fingers trembled on empty air. As the door clicked shut, she stood alone in the dim light, the generator's hum her only company. And in that moment, Amara understood that love sometimes meant letting someone go, even if it shattered you from the inside. Days passed in a blur of empty routines. Amara returned to the market stall, her smile fixed and hollow as she greeted customers who asked why she looked so tired. The rain had stopped, but its memory lingered in every drip from the eaves and every muddy puddle she tiptoed around. She tried to fill her hands with work, selling bracelets, sweeping floors, cooking for herself, but each task felt meaningless without Jay's silent presence beside her. Late at night, she pressed her back against the cold wall of her shack and let the darkness drown her thoughts. She slept with her bracelet stringer clutched in her palm and dreams tangled her mind in knots of longing. She replayed every moment he'd been there. The way he had watched her smile, the quiet way he said nothing when she told her story, the weight of his gaze when she healed his wounds with kindness. Anger rose in her throat, then slipped away like water between broken bricks. She realized that her heart had grown fragile in his absence, and now, more than anything, she needed answers. When Jay finally returned, it was not under the cloak of storm clouds, but in the glaring midday sun, dressed in a crisp shirt and trousers that looked too fine for these dusty streets. Amara spotted him first at the edge of the market, leaning against a post as if he were waiting for her performance. Her breath caught, and her heart pounded against her ribs like a frantic drum. He approached without knocking or announcement, and Amara raised her chin defiantly. "Why?" she demanded, hands clenched at her sides. Jay paused a few feet away, eyes heavy with apology and something darker, fear. "I had to," he said, voice low but clear for the first time. "They were looking for me." She laughed, a harsh, broken sound, and shook her head. "Looking for you? Who are you?" His silence hung between them like a guillotine. She realized then that she needed to pry the truth from him or she would never forgive what he'd done. And quietly she vowed to make him pay for every second of silence. He led her away from the market to a quiet corner behind a row of shuttered shops. There he unfolded the truth like a map of scars. Jay was not a homeless stranger but a billionaire scion fleeing his own life. His fiancée, Vanessa, the woman in sunglasses who smelled of money and power, had sent men to find him after rumors of his disappearance reached the tabloids. He confessed how suffocating the world had become, the endless board meetings, the hollow praise, the feeling that every smile was bought. Amara listened, arms crossed, trying to mask the storm of emotions inside her. Betrayal burned in her chest, but beneath it simmered something softer. Compassion for a man she trusted despite knowing nothing of his past. When he finished, she met his gaze with eyes that hurt like minefields. "You lied to me," she said quietly. He reached out, but she stepped back, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I saved you," she whispered. "You destroyed me." Jay's world had been built on gold and glass towers, but here, in the alleyway stained by rain and regret, his walls crumbled. He dropped to one knee, not with a ring but with raw, desperate honesty. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking under the weight of his own shame. "I came here to find peace, but I found you. And I lost myself when I lost you." Amara's shoulders shook as she stared at him, the hum of the distant market fading into silence. She wanted to walk away, to bury herself in the security of her old routines. But something in his eyes, something real and unguarded, pulled at the fragile threads of her heart. She knelt beside him in the quicksand of her own conflicted feelings, and all the walls she'd built around her loneliness cracked and collapsed. They stayed there, kneeling in mud and tears, until the sun dipped low enough to paint the sky in bruised pinks and purples. Then Jay stood and extended his hand, rusty generator forgotten, at the curb. Amara hesitated, glancing at the place where their worlds had collided. Finally, she took his hand, and for a heartbeat, the universe tilted as though their halves had at last become whole. He pulled her up, gathering the torn pieces of trust between them like precious shards. "I need you," he said simply. "Not to save me again, but to stand with me." Amara closed her eyes against the glow of the evening, letting the promise of something real warm her from the inside. Months later, they fought side by side in courtrooms and boardrooms, Amara speaking for Jay's company with the fierce dignity she'd learned on these streets. Reporters called her a gold digger, Vanessa labeled her a phase, Jay's father threatened to cut him off, but none of it mattered. Amara stood tall, her voice echoing with the power of truth. When the final verdict recognized her intelligence and bravery, she looked at Jay and saw something more than gratitude in his eyes, respect. Later, at the very bus stop where their story began, Jay knelt in the rain once more, this time with a small gold ring glinting in his hand. "Will you marry me?" he asked, voice steady under the soft patter of raindrops. Amara smiled through tears, her heart full. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." And as the rain washed over them, they embraced beneath the forgiving sky. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe for more, share with friends, and comment below what lesson you carry in your heart. In the weeks that followed his rain-soaked proposal, life felt like a whirlwind for Amara and Jay. Invitations flooded in with ornate envelopes, glossy magazines published their love story feature, and social media buzzed with chatter about the modern Cinderella and her prince. Yet behind the excitement, tension simmered. Vanessa, Jay's former fiancée, refused to fade into the background. She hired a swarm of private investigators and PR operatives, each determined to unearth every detail of Amara's past and Jay's brief disappearance. The morning after the engagement party, held under strings of fairy lights in Amara's newly renovated courtyard, the tabloids splashed anonymous accusations across their front pages, claims that Amara was secretly a corporate spy, that her bracelet-making was a front for laundering money, that Jay had abandoned a life of privilege for a con artist's companionship. Amara watched the headlines with clenched teeth, her breath catching in her throat. She remembered the nights of empty dinners and sleepless worry before Jay returned, and she felt rage burn like dry leaves under hot coals. But she refused to let anger dictate her next move. Instead, she called Jay into the tiny study they'd set up above her old shack and said, "Let's show them who we really are." Jay's heavy sigh broke the tension. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low but steady. She nodded and picked up her pen. "We fight back with truth." Together, they drafted a strategy. Jay would hold an intimate press conference at the bus stop where they first met, and Amara would share her own story of hardship, resilience, and the unexpected bond that changed both their lives. They rehearsed every answer, anticipated every attack, and armed themselves with evidence, photographs of Amara's childhood home, testimonials from neighbors who'd known her since she was a little girl, certified documents attesting to her charity work. When the night fell and rain drummed softly on the tin roof, they knew the storm of words was about to hit. But this time, they would stand shoulder to shoulder, ready for whatever came next. The morning of the press conference felt electric. A thin drizzle coated the pavement, each raindrop mirrored by a flashbulb or a phone camera. Reporters jostled for position under umbrellas. Live streamers gripped selfie sticks, and gossip bloggers whispered speculations into their mics. Jay arrived first, dressed simply in a dark raincoat over his tailored suit, an intentional blend of his two worlds. He stood under the same flickering street lamp where Amara had first found him, looking both nervous and resolute. Moments later, she appeared in a bright yellow raincoat that made her glow against the gray backdrop. Their eyes met, and without words, they exchanged a promise. Honesty, no matter how painful. Jay cleared his throat and began by acknowledging his disappearance, admitting his fear of the suffocating life he once led. He spoke of Amara's kindness, how it had given him a glimpse of humanity beyond boardroom tables and red carpet events. Then he cued her gently, "Amara." All eyes turned. Amara felt her heart race, but she remembered the strength she'd found in hardship, how selling bracelets under the harsh sun had taught her perseverance. She stepped forward and told her story. A childhood in a cramped one-room home, nights spent studying by candlelight, dreams of a better life tempered by the reality of poverty. She explained why she'd helped the stranger in the rain, describing how compassion mattered more than any paycheck. As her words spilled out, the cameras captured her sincerity. The tremor in her voice, the determined set of her jaw, the tears she brushed away with the back of her hand. Questions came fast, about authenticity, about motives. But Amara answered each one with clarity and grace. By the end, the mood had shifted. What began as a spectacle of scandal transformed into a celebration of truth. Headlines the next day read, "From rain-soaked stranger to soulmate, a story of redemption, and bracelet maker becomes boardroom heroine." Vanessa's attacks crumbled under the weight of their candor, and for the first time since the proposal, Amara and Jay felt the sweet relief of vindication. In the days after the press conference, Amara and Jay faced a different storm, the boardroom battle for Jay's company. Vanessa's allies on the board had staged a coup attempt, accusing Jay of neglecting his duties and jeopardizing billions in assets by focusing on petty personal affairs. Investors were jittery, stock prices wavered, and the company's elegant glass towers seemed to shudder with uncertainty. But now Jay had a pardon. Our encourage, Amara. Despite never having set foot in a corporate office until recently, she studied financial reports with fervor, asked incisive questions, and challenged executives who tried to downplay the recent PR debacle. She reminded everyone that empathy and ethics could be as powerful as profit margins. During a tense board meeting held in a sleek conference center downtown, she rose to address the room. Tablets flickered with charts, lawyers whispered in corners, and Jay watched from across the table, his eyes shining with pride. Amara spoke of the human cost of cutthroat decisions. The factory workers whose layoffs threatened entire communities. The families who relied on the company's charitable initiatives. Her voice, steady and sincere, cut through the corporate jargon like a beacon of conscience. She unveiled a new proposal that balanced profitability with social responsibility, a model for sustained growth that prioritized people over mere numbers. The board members exchanged glances. Some nodded thoughtfully, others scribbled notes. When the vote came, A surprising majority sided with Jay and Amara's vision. Gasps rippled through the room as Vanessa's faction faltered. In that moment, Amara realized that the skills she'd honed in adversity, resourcefulness, empathy, unyielding resolve, had prepared her for this battlefield. And as the chairman pounded his gavel to seal the decision, Jay reached across the table, grasped her hand, and whispered, "You saved more than me." Despite their victories, Amara carried scars from the betrayals and secrets that had almost torn them apart. One evening, Jay found her alone on the rooftop terrace of their modest home office, gazing at the neon glow of the city skyline. The generator from months ago still hummed quietly below, now repurposed to power a string of fairy lights around the terrace. He sat beside her, and for a while they watched the traffic pulse like veins through the urban sprawl. Finally, he asked softly, "Do you ever regret it?" Amara's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "Regret that I saved you?" she asked, tone even. Jay nodded. She let out a small laugh, part bitterness, part relief. "I regret the pain," she said. "I hate how you left me. I hate how I doubted you. But I don't regret finding you." Jay pulled her into an embrace, the city lights flickering around them like a halo of second chances. He kissed her hair and promised, and meant it, to never let her go again. In that quiet moment, they healed old wounds, acknowledging mistakes and forgiving each other. The rain began to fall again, soft and persistent, and instead of running for cover, they stood together under the droplets, letting the water wash away the last traces of anger and fear. But peace proved temporary. Vanessa, stung by defeat in both love and business, resorted to desperate measures. She orchestrated a hacking scheme that exposed Jay and Amara's private communications. Text messages filled with vulnerability, video recordings of their private moments, and personal letters that were never meant for public eyes. When news outlets ran stories under headlines like "Billionaire's Betrayal," "Intimate Secrets Exposed," Amara felt raw embarrassment sting her cheeks. She had shared her life, the real, unfiltered version, with Jay in trust, and now that trust was weaponized against them. Jay was furious, rage crackling in his gaze like lightning. But Amara held him back, citing the lessons she'd learned about vengeance and compassion. Instead of lashing out, they chose strategy. They hired a cybersecurity firm to trace the leaks back to Vanessa's network, and they simultaneously released their own, behind-the-scenes documentary on social media, showing the world exactly who they were, warts and all. They revealed the hacking attempt live, turning the tables on Vanessa by inviting viewers into their home, their workshops, their quiet moments of laughter and tears. The public response was electric. Hashtags like #TruthWins and #LoveUnfiltered trended worldwide, with millions of viewers praising their courage. Vanessa's smear campaign backfired spectacularly, her own reputation tarnished by the exposed malice behind the leaks. For Amara, this victory was more than vindication. It was a testament to vulnerability as strength and to truth as the ultimate weapon. As autumn leaves began to blanket the streets in fiery gold and crimson, Amara and Jay transformed their home into something more than a couple's refuge. It became a community center. They renovated the shack's adjacent lot, installing benches carved from reclaimed wood, a small library of donated books, and a workshop space where Amara taught bracelet making to local youth. Jay funded the project, but Amara ran it, infusing each corner with warmth and purpose. Word spread, and soon volunteers arrived to help paint murals, donate supplies, and teach skills ranging from carpentry to coding. The place buzzed with laughter and possibility, a symbol of resilience rising from adversity. One chilly morning, as Amara showed a group of teenagers how to thread beads into patterns, Jay slipped in beside her, watching her with pride. She hadn't trained for public speaking or board meetings, but here, in laughter-filled aisles of paint pots and books, her gifts shone brightest. After the class, they walked down the street to the bus stop where it all began. The yellow raincoat she wore months ago was long gone, replaced now by a jacket that bore the logo of their new nonprofit. Jay took her hand and they stood together in silence, watching as a young girl with curly hair climbed onto the bus and waved at them before disappearing inside. In that moment, they knew their love had become more than a private rescue. It was a force that lifted an entire community. Yet life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One morning, a sudden downturn in global markets sent Jay's company into freefall. Stock prices dipped, investors panicked, and rumors circulated that poor management had led to the crash. Headlines screamed Billionaire's empire in peril alongside images of Amara's humble home office, suggesting she was to blame. Old fears resurfaced, the sting of betrayal, the ache of uncertainty. Amara awoke to frantic knocks on the door, a live-stream crew demanding her reaction. Instead of retreating, she donned her rain boots, grabbed an umbrella, and marched outside. Standing before the cameras, she spoke with calm authority. Yes, we're facing challenges. Yes, mistakes were made. But we'll rise because we've done it before. Internally, she fought panic, recalling how she'd mopped floors as a child and stitched bracelets under candlelight. This was merely another storm, and storms, she knew, were temporary. Jay joined her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Together, they announced a transparent recovery plan, cost-cutting measures that would protect workers, investments in sustainable projects, and a transparent monthly update to stakeholders. Their candid approach soothed investors who responded with cautious optimism. Within days, the market stabilized. Amara, once an invisible street vendor, now stood as a testament to fortitude under pressure. In the calm after the crisis, the city celebrated their resilience. Journalists penned feature articles on Amara's journey from poverty to boardroom hero, while local schools invited her to speak about overcoming adversity. She accepted graciously, transforming her personal narrative into a universal lesson. That kindness, honesty, and perseverance could outlast any tempest. One afternoon, after speaking at a neighborhood event, Amara and Jay took a slow walk through the marketplace. The familiar sights, the scent of fried plantains, the shouts of vendors hawking wares, the laughter of children chasing each other through stalls, felt like home in a way they hadn't in years. Amara paused at her old bracelet stand, now owned by one of her apprentices. She ran her fingers over the worn wooden plank, remembering the nervous hope she'd felt the first day she set it up. Jay slipped his arm around her waist and whispered, "We did this together." She leaned into him and pointed at a young woman carefully threading beads next to the stand. "It's bigger than us," she said softly. "It's about everyone who refused to give up." Months turned to years, and the foundation Amara and Jay built became a beacon of positive change across the city. They expanded operations, opening a second community center in a neglected suburb, launching scholarship programs for underprivileged youth, and sponsoring mentorship initiatives that paired corporate professionals with aspiring entrepreneurs. Yet for all their accomplishments, the memory of that first rainy night remained sacred. On the anniversary of the proposal, they returned to the bus stop at dawn. The streets were empty, the air crisp and cool. Jay handed Amara a steaming cup of tea, and they stood in silence as the sky lightened from obsidian to soft lavender. A gentle drizzle began, each droplet a reminder of the storm that had brought them together. Amara closed her eyes and let the rain kiss her cheeks, smiling as Jay slipped a small, silver locket around her neck, inside a tiny bead from her first handmade bracelet. "For all that's past and all that's to come," he said. She opened the locket, touched the bead, and whispered, "Always." That evening, they hosted a rain-themed fundraiser under a canopy of fairy lights. Guests strolled through an art exhibit showcasing local talent, sipped spiced cider, and danced to live music blending traditional drums with modern beats. Amara took the stage to thank everyone for believing in their vision. She spoke of how a simple act of kindness, offering shelter to a stranger, had grown into a movement that uplifted the entire community. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jay joined her, as he always did, standing behind the scenes to let her have the spotlight. Afterward, they wandered through the crowd, greeting friends, sharing laughter, and listening to stories of lives touched by their work. A young woman approached and thanked Amara for teaching her to make bracelets. Another credited Jay's transparency for inspiring her to start a nonprofit. Each encounter warmed Amara's heart, reminding her that their story wasn't just viral for its drama, it resonated because it was real. Late that night, back at home, Amara and Jay curled up on the old couch. Still the same battered couch, now adorned with plush pillows and cozy throws. They reflected on their journey. The long nights of uncertainty, the taste of fear, the thrill of victory, the pain of betrayal, and the power of truth. Jay wrapped an arm around her shoulders and sighed. "We've been through every kind of storm imaginable." Amara nodded, pressing her cheek against his chest. "And we've come out stronger." She traced the lines of his face with her fingertips, remembering how lost he'd looked when she first found him. Now he was grounded, purposeful, in love and in life. They vowed to keep building, each day writing a new chapter in their shared story. In the years that followed, their tale became legend in the city, a testament to the idea that love and compassion could change destiny. Documentaries featured their rise from unlikely pair to philanthropic power couple. University courses studied their business model that married profit with purpose. Street artists painted murals of Amara offering her coat in the rain, Jay kneeling with a ring, and the community center rising behind them like a beacon. Yet neither of them ever lost sight of the small moments that mattered. The warmth of a shared cup of tea, the quiet laughter over handmade bracelets, the gentle reassurance in each other's eyes after a long day's work. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful storm, Amara awoke before dawn and slipped out alone to the bus stop. A gentle rain fell, and she stood there in silence, feeling the cool droplets trail down her skin. She closed her eyes and let memories wash over her, of fear, of hope, of a life changing forever because someone reached out in kindness. When she opened her eyes, Jay was there beside her, carrying 2 mugs of steaming tea and wearing that same calm, loving expression that had first drawn her in. He handed her a mug and they stood together under the rain, sipping quietly as the world began to stir. Finally, Jay reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black box. "For a promise," he said simply. Amara's breath caught and tears welled in her eyes. Inside was a delicate gold band etched with tiny raindrops, an heirloom he'd designed himself. "To remind you," he continued, slipping it onto her finger, "that love is the shelter that lasts forever." Amara put her hand to her heart, overwhelmed by the beauty of their journey and the depth of their bond. If their story has touched your heart, if you believe that simple acts of kindness can change the world, please like this video, subscribe for more unforgettable tales, share with friends who need a reminder that hope endures, and comment below what lesson you'll carry forward. Your voice matters, and together we can build a legacy of compassion that outlasts any storm.